Okay. Oh, that was a little loud. All right. So we've got an update for my final project. I just climbed through what I'm hoping will be the most menacing part of this. I've got a couple other SQL commands to work through, um, and integrating them with some of the logic checks because I'm pulling records based on like searching and returning values. It's a little different than the fishing expedition one I did, but so here's the dashboard. It's all very simple right now. The user's gonna enter an employee ID number, check in or check out. What'll happen is the check-in records table will record the employee ID as a foreign key to the employee records table, and then the check-in time and check-out time creates a date time value, and then stores it for that. So all it does is monitor in and out times. The employees themselves have first name, last name, whether or not they're allowed access, and then status. Status could be a few different things. I kind of left this open for interpretation because it can affect the allowed access. Basically, it's like an access modifier. Every employee has an ID number. They start at 101. I didn't want single digit employee numbers. And where's my... So you can see this is my first SQL query that I'm getting to put in there, and I'm just adding very simple. We got John Doe, Jane Smith, Peter Jones. I was gonna do Sharon Peters, but that joke's too old. But here you can see the in the employees record or the check-in records, the check-out time is automatically null. So it basically, because if somebody's checked in, it doesn't mean they have to be checked out. So there'll always be a record in there if somebody's checked in that doesn't have the completed value for checkout. And then I can also search those by the null value in that column. And of course I hit it twice. So that way there's extras in there. I'll have to run some SQL commands to clear the tables, but this is just for test data anyway. But I've been chewing through this stuff and, making good use of the search bar in relation to topics I find online based on what I want to do, and then, dive into this a little bit. But the readers and basically the whole database helper class here. This is a class specifically, it's almost like an interface, but it's not because it instantiates its own objects, real ones, or, interactable objects. And these come in and out with the get connection method here. And they only have a connection string for a property, and then they just have this method. And then basically, this method is accessing the database name, and then it's finding the executable path to the database, and then it's combining the executable path and the database name into the DB path, and then of course the connection string, the initial property, gets updated once that's all done correctly, and then you get this value here, which allows access to the database. I haven't run this yet. This is why I'm doing the update now, because I've spent a few hours getting this without red squiggly lines and really commenting it out so I can track what's going on. It's one of those times where the code is harder to read off the rip than it normally is for me. I mean, I primarily read Python, so of course it's a little more difficult, but the code is just a little more blocky. So we've got employee. This is a class. It's got the employee ID, first name, last name, status, and allow access. So I just built the classes the same way. And I guess the best way to do this, because I'm going to be creating entries for the table from the UI, is to have a default constructor to build an empty object. So that way the properties can be updated as the UI is interacted with, because if you ask for all of this stuff in the normal constructor at once, the UI is not going to be able to perform that. And basically, like, if there's one little mistake in an input, it's going to create that employee, and if the logic checks don't catch it, it's going to create that employee object with false information, which we do not want in our database. This is an untouched form. This is most of where I got the functionality, of course, to finish up first. Time records are the same way, but they do have a default. Right here, the date time. The question mark here just defaults it out to null. So it's nullable, is all that says. It is nullable. It's not always set to null, but at least not here. It's set as a default in the database, but I don't update that value here. I let the values in the interface and the program get updated to match the database. The database is the core of what's going on. The interface is just, shuttling the information back and forth from the UI to the database again. Where's the one I don't like? There's one in here. No, this one's not too bad. So, the employee management. This is because it's coming with just this form, but when the form loads, I have to load these combo box possibilities. So this is for the employee status. More could be added here, and then certain logic would have to be updated later as well to check for these in case they affect the access modifier or the access property. So it's active, on leave, or terminated. Defaults to active in the combo box. This button click right here is not too bad. This was the first one I kind of got my toes wet in understanding how this data, when you're accessing a database, how you receive it from a query, and then what you can do with it and what you have to do in order to deal with it. So the try block that starts here, this one's just basically make sure it's a number. Make sure you're putting in real numbers here, be an adult. And then try is use the database helper class to get the connection. So you're using the using statement here opens up a SQL connection data type named connection just to make it easy, and the database helper class .get connection is called. So this method is called, and it basically operates the entire. So the database helper basically can. Let's get back to the code I was just looking at. Please. Where'd you go? So right here, basically the connection opens up. This opens the connection between the database and the code that we're looking at right now. So we get the SQL query, which is pretty straightforward for this one. It's just you get the first name, last name, status, allowed access. You get everything except for the employee ID. You just get it where the employee ID matches. That'll already be entered. You create a command object. So a command is obviously how you tell the database what you want. And then the command dot parameters. So this accesses the parameters, and then add with value at employee ID from employee ID. And employee ID is gathered from the text box employee ID.text, so right up here. And then it sends this out employee ID as long as it passes this test. So that's where that comes from. The data reader right here executes the SQL command. So this basically puts this query into a form where it can be processed like a SQL command. So it's sort of the intermediary part for that. If it's successful, the employee is found, then it takes the text box for the first name and it takes the text portion of it, and it uses the first name from the reader. So it's reading this line of the database, and it's taking the first name and it's converting to a string, making sure it's a string to put in the text box, and just putting it there. It's updating the screen with the information of the employee. and then the status, and then the allowed access is just a checkbox. And then I got a lot of message boxes on this because I want to really stomp my way through operating the program, because it's more, I think I shot a little above my weight here with this, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is if it's not found, it just clears all the fields, and then here's where it catches the exceptions. So the connection between the SQL connection, the database helper, and then these commands that get brought in, these built-in methods, parameters, add with value, those are all basically just how to shuffle the string text of a SQL query from the C# code into the database to actually get a response. The dashboard. Where's the other one? Where are you? Yeah, this one. I can leave that empty. Doesn't really matter. But this one was a whopper. This was I could feel myself sweating trying to work through this one when I first got into it. So first thing we do here, we're checking in. We're checking the value from the text box to make sure that the employee ID trimmed down is real. There's something in there. And then check it if it's a valid integer. All right, do that second. And then we do a bunch of checking here. So we're going to try using the SQL connection to open up a connection to the database. Open the connection. So create a SQL query to check the employee status and access, then prepare the command to run, getting all, or star, the columns we need in one go to minimize database calls. So this will pretty much always return a single thing though. So all it's doing is checking before it checks in, because all it's going to wind up doing is create a not an employee, but the check-in table. It's going to create an entry for the check-in table. That's what it's supposed to be able to do. But it's going to be using the employee ID that's entered, and it has to check to make sure it's a real person first. Then it has to try to open this connection to the database, and then it has to create the check query. And then here it opens the connection of the check query and then pushes it through with the employee ID. You let the reader check the command, and it executes the reader, making sure this is a SQL statement, and it executes it if it can. And basically, because the reader only comes back showing how many rows have been affected, that's what we check here. We check if not, the reader has rows. So if there's 0 rows returned, that means the employee hasn't been found. There's nothing to check in. No one, an employee of that number cannot check in. We close the reader and return. And then here we read the first and only row and extract the needed values into variables. So we get the allowed access and the status. And so if not allowed access, so if allowed access is false, or status equals terminated or off duty, then it says access denied. Please contact an administrator. Check-in failed. So the employee is valid if they've made it to this point. So they're not under any of these. Their allowed access flag is true. Their status is not terminated or off duty. Now we check if they're already in. So here we check from check-in records where this employee ID is, and we check if the checkout time is null, meaning they're checked in, but there's no checkout time. And so executing the commands pretty much the same way. So the open check-in records for that employee, obviously there's only going to be one, but it's still pulled to an integer, already checked in command, executes scalar. So a scalar pulls a single value from a row and a column. It just grabs one thing, and it's one I found on here. Execute scalar right here. So it returns the first column of the row in the results set or a null reference, nothing in old VB. If the result set is empty, it returns a maximum of 2033 characters. So it grabs basically like one thing right out of the database where we're looking, pops it in. So if we have anything, if open records is anything above 0, so if it returns any value, that means they're already checked in. That means we have a record of a check-in without a checkout, a null value in the checkout. And it says employee is already already checked in, check-in failed. So they can't check in because they're already checked in. Here I'm checking if they've already worked a certain amount of hours. So this right here is another query, and this selects the sum. Data difference is a method that automatically finds the difference between two date time values, and it's by the hour, and it's check-in time, check-out time, and then it's from the check-in records table where the employee ID matches the one that was given, and where check-in time is greater than or equal to the date added in the last 7. So it basically says date add by the day, subtract 7 from that get date, and then so that's in the last week, in the last 7 days. And checkout time is not null, so they can't currently be checked in. So this prepares all that, combines it, or takes the value at the employee ID, opens the SQL command, the hours check command, and the parameters all get pushed through. Here we get the result, and this is an execute scalar, which pulls just the one value we want. And then we take hours, take it as a double at first, and then if it's null, or the result is equal to null, but possibly this right, the little question mark is a nullable at 0, it converts it to double. So as long as it's not null or any of this other stuff, it converts it to double. There's no reason to convert it if it's 0. Adjustable limit for hours worked per week right here is 50. So I could change that if I wanted, but so all the checks have passed. So now we insert the check-in record. So we haven't gotten stopped by any of these checks. We got the initial check to make sure we got something back, check to make sure the access is okay, check to make sure there's actually a record of this employee, check to make sure they don't have over 50 hours. Each time I open, well, maybe I'll just do a quick, I'm thinking it's going to be a C# logic like if statement, but I got all these other little things to add to it. Really makes the code chewier. But this one right here is pretty straightforward. All the checks have passed. So here's insert into the check records table for employee ID and check-in time, the values of employee ID and check-in time. The checkout time will automatically default to null as soon as it hits the table, so I don't have to do that here. And then here we add parameters for the employee ID and the check-in time and execute the insert. So the insert command, the query is how we write it out in SQL. The insert command is what actually changes the value. So here we have checked the number of rows affected to confirm success. We're doing the same thing we did before. Making sure that there's something returned. As long as there's anything returned, so number of rows affected, that means the check-in worked. And then we've got the catches down here that are basically just built in for any of these errors that could happen. Which I found those, a good chunk of those were basically like pre-made. You start typing out the if-else is at the end of a try block, and the little GitHub autocorrect pops in. But checkout does pretty much the same thing. There's just a couple differences. It's a little shorter. So basically this one does the same thing, opens the connection, checks for if it's valid, tells them they're having a concerning human error if they do this one wrong. There's a few gentle taps towards the user in this one, but the checkout fails if the employee is not found. And if this employee is not currently checked in, they can't check out, so they can never leave. Ever. But basically those are the only major checks in this one. And then here's where it all goes down, like the update query, the SQL command, the actual commands that go in to change the record or update the record. Because the checkout is an update, the check-in is an add or an insert. And then as long as we've got some rows affected, we can know kind of if something worked or not. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I don't know. I could probably try to fire this up and see if it does something. I don't know. This is just where I'm at right now. I think I still got a few other moving parts to get in. We'll see. I know there's an employee 101. Check in. Check in successful. Okay. And let's check out with that same employee. I'm going to make sure that actually clears the employee 101 has 817 right there, null. 817, null. What was it from 2 days ago at 5? I was really going through this, but see, and I got a null update on this one. My checkout time should be updated. Nothing showed up here. So yeah, like I said, I can run this, but I don't know how much of it's actually working. So I might have to. I probably still have some debugging to do. The code is in here. I understand kind of what it's doing, but until these pieces are interlinked, I really can't even start to test it that heavily. So part of me is just kind of like writing through the code and double checking the documentation to make sure I'm using stuff that works with SQL, which is nice that they have this. Just go to the .NET version for Microsoft Learn, and they got all these methods and properties, SQL commands. You can get command builders, all this other stuff, but the command builders are pretty nice. Or not the command builders, but the command area is pretty nice because you can see all these different methods and interactions you can have between C# and SQL, and of course it's all this. There's a downloadable PDF of it because there's just so much of it. Event arguments, all that stuff. So, but this is where I'm at so far. I know I probably should have started this much earlier, but I've been plowing away at crippling anxiety about graduating and getting a job, and basically just plugging away at my internship because I had to get 150 hours done in the last half of the semester on that. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I kind of want to try to run this again because I don't like that it didn't work. 101. Check in. Okay. 102. Check in. Employee is already checked in. Oh, that's well, let's go 102. I just realized when we're wrong. Check out successful. 101. Check in. It's already checked in. Because I think one of my test values that I put in there. Oh yeah, it should freeze right now. That'd be perfect. Obviously things are going very well. I probably rushed it. Still not seeing the checkout on today. Yeah, I'll have to figure something out. But anyway, that's where I'm at so far. I'm going to push more and debug and sweat through my teeth enough to get this done before class on Tuesday, because this is my last week of class at this university.